I once made the mistake of asking a group of middle school youth to draw a timeline of their life experiences. I thought that they might remember who had been influential in their lives and how their lives had been shaped by those people and experiences. I wanted them to remember all those folks, and I kind of expected to see a piece of paper with a straight line of dates and memories and influential people that would help me get to know them and maybe, just maybe, help them gain some insight into their own lives. Middle school youth. Rather than straight lines with nice, neat dates, people, and strong memories, the youth filled their lines with zigs and zags and spirals and dips and dives and repeats and valleys. And a few attached their ages and their names, and some real but mostly made-up memories. My favorite was the guy who named the date his family had sent him into treatment because he had become hooked on phonics. It's an old one, but it's still pretty funny. Now, after spending time with Joseph's story in the book of Genesis, I realized the kids those many years ago were actually drawing the timeline of Joseph's life. His life did not progress in one neat, tidy, straight line from beginning to end. It was not a straight, sequential path of experiences and people. Instead, his life took zigs and zags and spirals and dips and peaks and valleys before he arrived at the place we heard about today. You might remember that when Joseph was a young teen, his brothers did not like him very much. He was the golden child. He was kind of a braggart when he would share his dreams about how one day he would be their ruler, the 11th son-in-law instead of the first. And his brothers did not like the future Joseph imagined, so they sold that uppity brat to people who were traveling to Egypt. I often dreamed of doing that with my sisters. Dream come true. Now, in Egypt, Joseph was purchased by Potiphar. And Potiphar quickly realized that Joseph was incredibly skilled and blessed at managing his fields and his animals and his household. So he turned all responsibility and decisions over to Joseph. Now, the problem is Potiphar's wife had an eye for good-looking young male servants. So when Joseph refused to join her for some afternoon delight, she accused him of assaulting her. So Potiphar had Joseph thrown in jail. Now, Egyptian jails were not pleasant places to be then or now. So Joseph was kind of miserable in a cell with the king's personal servant and the king's personal cook. Now, both of those servants of the king had dreams that they could not understand. Joseph still had the gift for interpreting dreams. So when he interpreted their dreams correctly, well, the one who lived, the personal servant, remembered that. Because soon after the personal servant went back to waiting on the king of Egypt began having very disturbing dreams. And no one in his household or his court could explain the meaning of these dreams. But his personal servant, the one who credited Joseph's dreams for restoring him to his position, remembered Joseph. So the king called Joseph to him to interpret his dreams. And Joseph made sure that the king knew that it was not Joseph's skill, but it was the God of Israel who gave him the ability to understand what dreams were saying. Then he told the king that the dreams he had been having were about an approaching famine. There would be 7 years of great crops and then 7 years of failed crops. And if something was not done during those 7 years of failed crops, many people would die. Now, the king believed that because nobody else could explain these dreams, that Joseph was indeed blessed by his God. So he took a huge risk and put Joseph in charge of managing the storage and distribution of all the crops. Now, Joseph's life had taken some pretty amazing zigs and zags. He had started out as the favorite golden child, had been sold to a caravan going to Egypt, had been put in charge of a rich man's household, had been thrown in prison, had been brought up to talk to the king, and now was at the peak of his career when he was given the responsibility of keeping the people of Egypt alive. He had found favor. Now, the timeline of Joseph's life was about to come full circle on the day his other 11 brothers came to Egypt looking to buy some grain, because the famine that was taking place now in its second year had spread through the whole Middle East region, and their brothers and their families and their crops and their herds were all starving to death. They had heard that there was food in Egypt, so they went there to see if they could purchase some grain from the people in Egypt. The brothers were taken to see Joseph. Now, they did not recognize their little brother who was now all grown up and in charge. All they saw was an official who might or might not choose to help them. They saw someone that they needed to please and respect and honor. Joseph, on the other hand, recognized his older brothers, the brothers who had bullied him, the brothers who had hated him, the brothers who had sold him into slavery in Egypt. Now, no one I know has lived a life that runs in a straight line. We've learned as we get older to draw a timeline in a straight line, but most of us, if we were to draw a real timeline of our lives, of our dates, of our people and significant events, my guess is our timelines would have zigs and zags and spirals and dips and dives and peaks and valleys. I suspect we can all look back on our lives and recognize those times when we wondered how life had become so incredibly complicated. When we wondered how life had become so strange, or so exciting, or so hard. I suspect we could all look back and remember people who treated us really well as people who treated us incredibly badly. And I suspect we all have places in our lives where we feel the pain of regret and guilt. We all have moments in our lives that we can use to blame others for where we are in life. Joseph looked at his brothers and remembered every single thing that had happened to him because of them. He wasn't ready to talk, so he sent them away with a test of their honesty. And while they were away, the brothers suddenly started thinking about that little guy, Joseph, that they had sold into slavery in Egypt. And they began to wonder if the path of their lives had taken a dive because of, well, the guilt and the remorse that they were feeling. Yes, Joseph sent his brothers away to test their honesty, but he needed time to think and to pray and to figure out what to do with these guys. His whole life had been turned upside down by their treachery. Rather than a straight line, his life had become a very long, a very winding road of betrayal, intrigue, imprisonment, and loneliness. Some success in spite of them. So when his brothers returned, Joseph did something quite remarkable. He told his brothers who he was. They reacted with shock, guilt, horror, sorrow, and fear, because Joseph was a powerful, powerful man in Egypt, and he could have had them imprisoned for life. Instead, he said, "Don't worry or blame yourselves for what you did." Can you imagine? Don't worry or blame yourselves for what you did. God is the one who sent me ahead of you to save lives. Somehow, by the grace of God, Joseph was able to see God's hand in the timeline of his life. We all walk long and winding roads of life, and we can let those long and winding roads take us into dead ends. And we can let ourselves get stuck in the dead ends of feelings of blame and regret and bitterness and anger. Or we can trust God to use the zigs and the zags, the highs and the lows, the peaks, the spirals, and the valleys of our lives to be a blessing to us so that we can become a blessing to others. When we trust God, we begin to see how that long and winding road of life brings us exactly to the place where we're supposed to be. A place of forgiveness, compassion, blessing, reconciliation, and hope. A place where we see that we have been truly blessed by God so that we can be a blessing to others. We end up in a place so much closer to God. Like Joseph's brothers, we will all experience regret and guilt for things that we have done. And like Joseph, we all have the choice to see insult and pain from others as something to hold us back, or something to help us grow to be where and who we are. The road of our lives does not go in a straight line. We can walk our life road alone with guilt and anger and bitterness, or we can walk our life road with God, who leads us to blessing. Sometimes we're the brothers. We do horrible things to others. Sometimes we're Joseph. We have horrible things done to us. The road of life is going to always be filled with zigs and zags and highs and lows and spirals and peaks and valleys. But when we include God in our lives, we eventually discover that we are winding up exactly where we're supposed to be. It is not you who did this, but it is God who brought me here to save lives. My hope is that we can all say that to ourselves, to God, and to those around us. Amen.